Welcome to Ideological. I'm your host, Zach Lee, and today we are talking about the Special Operations community and Special Forces with Green Beret and Army Ranger, Zach Schultz. Zach, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for the introduction.
Before we get into this, I always have to give this boring disclaimer that though Zach probably supports every podcast that I do, he officially does not. And so by being on this show, neither he nor his associates are therefore endorsing any of the other podcasts. So if I say something offensive, get mad at me, write me a hate mail, do whatever you want, but leave him and his family alone. So, Zach, I want to chat with you a little bit because this is an interesting thing. So this podcast really deals with anything interesting, ideas in culture and history and politics. And there's a subset of culture, which is special operations. And you're a guy that knows that pretty well. Before I get into these questions, though, tell me a little bit about your background and don't be humble. Zach's a very humble guy, but I want you to just be like, yeah, I'm good at stuff. But go ahead. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got in the military, what you did, that kind of stuff as far as being in special operations. I don't mean deployments and all that, but just kind of a little bit about your background.
So I'll just tell you what the paper says, right? So I went to school at Texas A&M. I graduated.
Is that a whoop? Or am I supposed to whoop there?
I wasn't going to. I didn't know if it was appropriate.
Okay, yeah. Whatever you want to do.
But no, so I went to school at A&M. I graduated in 2009. I went there without the expectation that I was going to join the military. I was going to study engineering. I thought I was going to go straight into construction or finance or something like that. But once I got there, I joined the Corps of Cadets. I was tricked into doing that by some of my friends from high school who also did that.
Yeah. It happens.
Life-altering trick though, because in the Corps of Cadets, you end up taking some ROTC classes. ROTC is Reserve Officer Training Corps. So the Army is just probably the biggest acronym using organization ever. So I'm going to use the acronym because it just slips out that way. But I'll always try to say what it is, but if I don't, stop me. So Reserve Officer Training Corps is the program that all cadets who are in school go to commission whenever they leave. So I was in these ROTC classes without being contracted to go into serve. So I did that for a year and a half. And in my sophomore year, I liked the training that I was getting. We, especially in the Corps, we did a lot of kind of extracurricular Army activities like Rudders Rangers or Ranger Challenge Team kind of programs. And I found that I was not bad at it. And
you can't see this because his shirt, but when we have our ideological calendar, he'll be Mr. July. So yeah, just go ahead. He's in pretty good shape.
So my sophomore year, they'll send you to a school, like some sort of like an Army school, if they get slots for it. So like airborne school, air assault school, learn how to fast rope out of helicopters and things like that. So they told me, hey, you've been doing our program. You're high enough on the order of merit list to go to one of these schools, but you're not contracted. So
time to sign.
Do you want to jump out of airplanes for free or not? And so I was like, you know what? I do. And so I was the first one in my family to go into the military. So I talked to my parents. I told them that's what I wanted to do. And they were apprehensive at first, but it's like, okay, well, can't stop you. So we'll support you.
All parents are apprehensive because there's danger.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, they're like, wait, they want to send you to airborne school and that's why you're doing this thing. So I went and signed a contract and then commissioned in 2009. I started out as an armor officer. So whenever you leave the Reserve Officer Training Corps, you go in as a second lieutenant. And you get branched into one of the different branches in the military, like what most people think of: infantry, armor, aviation, etc. So I started out as an armor officer at Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos in Central Texas. I did that for 3 years. Went to Ranger School during that time after my armor training. And at the end of that 3 years, it's like right before you promote to captain. So you're a second lieutenant, a first lieutenant, and then at the end of your first lieutenant time, you can apply to go to Special Forces. So I learned what Special Forces was. I learned more about their mission, and I didn't want to pursue a career in the branch that I was in. And so I said, hey, I'm gonna try this thing out. So I submitted my application, went to selection, went to the Q course, and that's like a 14 to 16 month long training pipeline.
Oh yeah, and I've got questions specifically on the selection process because I know it is just a walk in the park.
Yeah, I mean it's super fun. So did that, and then after that I went to First Special Forces Group. That's based out of Washington State. There's 10 Special Forces groups in all, which I'm sure we'll get into, but that was the one that I was in. I did that for 4 years active duty. And then I got out in 2019 after had my daughter in 2017. My wife was in the military too. So we met while we were both in the military on active duty.
Army is for lovers, dude.
Army's
That's where
for
you
lovers.
go meet.
Yes,
That's right.
exactly. Yeah, you find a wife there, or they issue you one, as they say. So met Rachel, had Heidi. I did a deployment to Afghanistan. Very soon after she was born, and that was just kind of a priority changer for me. Up until that point, any deployment or training mission, like I was game. I was going. I wanted to. But that shifted what I felt I needed to be doing. So after that deployment to Afghanistan, we got out in 2019, and then I've been in the reserves ever since.
Fantastic. Well, one, obviously, thank you for your service. The family thing changes the game. So I interviewed a guy that had been a Navy SEAL for 20 years, and I was like, what are you afraid of? And he's like, man, there's not a lot I'm afraid. He's like, well, something happening to my family. And so the family thing, regardless of the unit you're in, is intense. Okay. Well, I've got a list of questions just to let everybody kind of learn a little bit about the special operations community and how that works. People often misuse the term special forces when they mean special operations, et cetera. Here's the first question for you. What are special operations in the military, and how is that different than regular units?
I'm glad you asked. Yes, it's important to define your terms before you get too far into stuff, right? So when you say special operations, you're talking about what people call SOF, or special operations forces, right? So each different branch of the military has its own SOF components. Some of them are the same, but they all have their unique flavor in their own missions. So when you talk SOF, I kind of like explain the different components, right? So in the Army, you've got different tiers. You've got your Delta Force, or like your Tier 1, and then you've got your Rangers and your Green Berets. And so when you say special forces, that's the Green Berets. So yeah, you have the Special Operation Forces, the Special Operations.
Right, to be clear, a Navy SEAL is not Special Forces, and Air Force PJ is not Special Forces. Special Forces is specifically Green Beret in the Army.
Exactly, yeah. So Green Beret, Special Forces, same. You've got them, you've got the Rangers, and then you've also got Civil Affairs, the PSYOPs, and that kind of rounds out your Army over on your Navy side. And I'm not an expert in the other branches,
That's okay.
so
I will fake it.
I will say what I think. I will say what I think is right. No, so you've got in the Navy, you've got their EOD teams. You've got, of course, the Navy SEALs, and then I know that they have some other
SWIC would be another one.
Boat teams, right? Exactly. And then over on the Air Force side, you've got your pararescue jumpers. You've got your joint tactical air controllers and the flavors that come with them. Yep, exactly. And then Marines, they've got their Marine Raiders, their Marine
Which
Force
is a new
Recons.
thing, right? Isn't that a new thing with JSOC? I used to not have, or...
It is new. It is newer.
Okay.
Yes. Not as old as in history as some of the other ones, but still, I'm like fantastic organization. We actually had a guy in my special forces battalion. No, it was in our group who helped stand up the Marine Force Recon, like training and selection pipeline and everything. And then he ended up coming out and going to the Army, and then didn't have enough abuse, so he went to the special forces.
That's right.
Force too. So so that kind of rounds out like what SOF special operation forces look like.
Is there anything for the Coast Guard? Coast Guard doesn't have a special operations wing.
I'm not aware.
No, I'm not trying to slam. I'm not trying to slam. Again, thank you for your service. But do they have anything?
I'm not aware of anything. Not to say they don't, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
But so what makes them different than a conventional force or like a regular force? So the conventional forces are, the big maneuver forces. You've got battalions, brigades, divisions of kind of the branches that we talked about. Armor, infantry, you've got all the supporting branches, logistics, artillery, medical service, intel, everything that goes with it. So those are made for a conventional fight. Large scale combat operations. Exactly. Kind of like peer on peer. So like World War II, Korean War type stuff. And even if it's not peer on peer, like, Vietnam War, where you're fighting conventional forces against guerrilla forces, but that's an application for them. Whereas the SOF focus more on the irregular warfare side of the house. So you have conventional warfare and then irregular warfare. Special. That's the special and special. Exactly. Special warfare. Well, it's, not everybody knows about it. So it is mystical, right? People don't know what it is. But there's a whole list of things that fall under irregular warfare, but it's the things that help support conventional warfare. So it's things that help stop us from going to war, like deterrence and kind of that I don't know it's like an insurance policy,
Sure.
right? Like you do all this stuff up on the front end so that you don't get to the conventional war.
Yes.
But then even during the conventional war side of things, it's very important for people to realize that SOF and conventional forces support each other. So the special operations forces may be the supporting role for a conventional unit through some of their more unique missions that they can do. Or it may be the conventional forces that are doing something to support the SOF mission, which is the actual, kind of the primary at that point in time. So they go hand in hand. It's fluid, and they have to have that interoperability for them to all work together.
I love it. So helpful. By the way, you'll notice it's Christmas time here. And so I like that there's the Christmas tree as we talk with a Green Beret. It's the softer side of Special Forces.
I wore my festive shirt a little bit.
See, that's right. You gotta represent. All right, talk to me, because there used to be a ton of movies that were just about war, and it was primarily conventional forces. Now, almost all the cool movies are special operators. How elite are special operators? What are some of the mental and personal components someone needs to have before deciding to pursue SOF?
Like Mark Wahlberg kind of elite? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's right.
No, so that's a really good question. So SOF, it makes up, it depends on what statistics you look at, but around 3 to 4% of your total military force. So it's a relatively small portion of the force for the amount of attention that it gets, the amount of casualties that they sustain comparatively, right? But it's because they're asked to do a lot of missions that put them in harm's way. Not that conventional forces don't, like not taking anything away from them, but SOF is used at all times, whereas conventional forces are usually only used during a conventional fight.
Yeah, and our most recent, combat theaters have all been these smaller Middle East. It's the kind of thing where you need more special operators.
Yes, it is, and it's also the kind of things where the fight that we had been doing was a counterinsurgency fight, which SOF is. That's one of their unique mission sets, to do a coin or a counterinsurgency operation where you want the host nation forces taking control of their own nation. You don't want to park our young men, young women, our American blood over there in these large units that are staying there for a long time, just trying to play whack-a-mole with these insurgents. You want the host nation, the governance, the people to take responsibility for their own country. So again, SOF's uniquely suited there. But
yeah, mental and personal components, because the guys' candles burn a little brighter who go into SOF. And so talk to me about what some of those things are.
So SOF units are usually made up of people that have been in the conventional forces, or at least, so like I said, I'll speak to the Army side because I don't know everything with the Navy and the Marines and the Air Force side. But in the Army side, it's made up of people who have been in the conventional forces. So like I said, I was in the conventional Army for 3 years before going over to special operations. That's how it's designed for the officer pipeline. It's similar for the enlisted side too. So you're going to get a more seasoned and well-rounded soldier. You're going to get a more mature, older, in most cases, soldier as well. And somebody who has more experience. So they've got the conventional experience. They now have the SOF training and the SOF experience that they can apply there. A part of the selection process. I mean, not that it's not difficult to go into the Army, but to go to basic training, to go to advanced infantry school and go to a unit is, you don't have to be the brightest bulb, right?
Sure.
But to go to these selection processes, I mean, you have to apply to them. There's screening, there's psychological tests, you have to write papers. They look at you very hard before they plug you into these units. So you get, I don't want to say a more intelligent soldier, but you get maybe someone who can apply themselves a little bit better.
Sure.
In most cases, not all cases, but in most cases. So the actual soldier is different, and that's because they're going to be entrusted to work and lead small teams where you don't have your boss right there with you in country. Like a conventional unit, you usually have your boss right there, and they're dictating, here's the operation, the order of how we're doing things. When you're a conventional force, you may be the only U.S. soldier in that country.
Yeah.
You're having to interact with the host nation forces, the ambassador, other 3-letter government agencies that are there, and you're running your whole mission. When you report back to your higher headquarters, you're not saying, hey, this is the situation, what do we do? You say, this is the situation, this is our analysis of it, this is what we're going to do.
Right.
And as long as it's not unethical or illegal, they usually say, okay, cool, carry on, thank you. Let us know how it goes.
That's awesome. Okay. So you are both a Green Beret and an Army Ranger. Tell us a little bit about how those are different.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got more questions on the training and stuff, but talk to me a little bit about how those are different.
Okay, so the Rangers and the Special Forces. So like we talked about, those are kind of like, I don't know, like they used to have this tier scale, and maybe it still exists, but kind of like a tier 2 force, right? So you can earn a Ranger tab and not go to the Ranger regiment. So like I have a Ranger tab. I went to Ranger school. I'm Ranger qualified, but I was never in the Ranger regiment. So and a lot of Special Forces officers have Ranger tabs. I say most of them do. It's kind of one of those things that if you show up without one, they say, okay, and your first team you're going to is Ranger school. So have fun, report back when you're done. And so they, it's kind of a rite of passage in some ways. But the Ranger Battalion, the Ranger Regiment, and the Special Forces are completely different, complementary but different. So the Rangers are, just premier elite infantry battalions. I mean, that's what they are. They do the infantry mission. They are incredibly well trained, incredibly well funded, and they've got just phenomenal soldiers. They go through their own. They are an infantry unit, but they go through their own selection process to get there to where they are and have very high standards of their people. But they're going to do your direct action missions. So like
when you need something assaulted and destroyed completely.
Raids, ambushes, assaults, things of that nature, airborne operations, right? And just platoons of meat eaters going after the enemy. Special Forces is a little bit different, right? So instead of having infantry platoons and companies, Special Forces are made up of these, kind of the core of Special Forces is an ODA, an Operational Detachment Alpha. That's your 12-man team. So when people, in the movies like the Horse Soldiers and things that have come out about the guys that first invaded Afghanistan, that was an ODA going in. So an ODA is made up of, you've got your captain and your warrant officer, who are kind of like the two people in charge of the team. And then you've got your senior enlisted advisor, who's your team sergeant, who's actually really in charge of the team. But you get the title, he gets the responsibility.
Got it.
And then you have an intel sergeant. So those are kind of your big four right there. And then you've got different jobs, military occupational specialties, MOSs within there. So you've got your weapons sergeants, your communication sergeants, your engineer sergeants, and then your medical sergeants. Mm-hmm. So all in all, you've got 12 people and you have 2 of everything. Got seniors and juniors. So it's designed where you have a plethora of knowledge, training, and experience, and you can also force multiply and split into 2 different identical teams. So you got the same capacity over here as you do over here. So when you go into a country to do what the Special Forces is designed to do, which is unconventional warfare, not irregular warfare, unconventional warfare. So it falls under irregular warfare, right? So all the acronyms. But UW, unconventional warfare, is kind of the Green Berets' bread and butter. That's what you saw in that movie, where you go in, you link up with a host nation, a resistance, a guerrilla force, you train, advise, assist, equip, empower, and then you help them in their fight, right? Yeah. Whether that's you fighting not alongside them, you always want them out front, or just in the back, advising them on what to do. But kind of the components of a Special Forces team are made up where you could take your 12-man team, go in and you can advise a battalion of guerrilla warfare fights. Exactly. You know the basics, you're able to teach the basics, and you enable other people. So it's called force multiplication, right? Sure. You're a force multiplier to be able to do that. So that's kind of where the Green Beret and the Rangers missions differ. The Rangers go kick people in the face, and the Green Berets teach other people how to shoot them in the face, and then they go do it. Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Okay, exactly. Super helpful. Okay, talk to us about Ranger School. So all these different selection processes and things that people have to go through in different SOF units. I've got another buddy, he was a 2nd Battalion guy, a Ranger guy, and he's mentioned that it's grueling in a different way. So we talked to Randy about BUDS, which is very difficult, 6 months, but you go home each night and you're off for the weekends, and they don't starve you. Whereas in some of these other ones, it's a little bit different. And so tell me what Ranger School is like, any fun stories you had. Because I actually have a friend that is a different guy. He failed Ranger School twice. And he's like, the hunger was unbearable. He's like, he goes, at one point on a hike, my vision went out. And he's like, I went temporary blind, and I had 5 sticks of gum, and I ate all of them with the wrapper on, and then I quit. And I was like, okay, well, that's so tell us a little bit about Ranger School.
And he went back
for more
2 times, right? Yes.
Failed still.
Insatiable hunger. No, okay. So Ranger School is, man, I think a lot of it has to do with when you go in your life, right? So I went as a young officer. I was 23. I had just finished all my armor training. It was before I'd even got to my first unit. I didn't have a family. So, I mean, I was just training to go, and that was the next thing. It was the next task that I wanted to go do. So I was just going and doing it, versus guys that go maybe in their late 20s that have a family, and you're like, oh, 60 days in the woods, I can't have my phone, I can't even call my family. Like, oh, this is less fun, right? So I had a blast at Ranger School. It was a lot of fun. I went in the summer. It was incredibly hot. And you start out Ranger School's 3 different phases in different places. So one, you're at Georgia at Fort Benning, and then another one you're in Dahlonega, which is in the mountains of Georgia. So that's your mountain phase. And then you go down to Florida. That's your swamp phase.
Which one's the worst? I've heard mountain, but you tell me which one you think is the worst.
I think it all depends on the time of year that you go with the weather. Because I had friends. In fact, one of my best friends from the Q course, he went to Ranger. He was a winter ranger.
You get it tied on with the white piping.
So
right?
I've heard that. I've never seen it, but yes, that is story.
Put your tab on,
right? Yeah. But he said that they were standing around the cadre. It was so cold that instead of making them pull security, laying down on the prone while their leadership was playing, and they got to take turns getting up and standing by burn barrels because it was so cold. And he said that after he graduated, he said for like 2 months, he would just be sitting at his house just shivering. He would have to just like always be under a blanket. He was like, my bones were cold after that. So I think it depends a lot on when you go, and it depends on the cadre that you get. It's like any other school. But Ranger School at its core is to teach you how to do the basics, how to follow directions in doing the basics, and how to support other people in leadership. That was one of the biggest things I took away from Ranger School, because you're all in this together, right? Like I was a second lieutenant, and you've got guys that are E6s. We even had an E6. We had a guy who was a first sergeant who was at Ranger School. I mean, the super seasoned guy that had been in the Army for like 15 years at Ranger School. And then you've got guys that are 19 years old that are a specialist in the Ranger Regiment that are just bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, happy to be there, right? But you're all in this together. So Ranger School builds on itself. When you're in those first phases, you do all the prereqs, the PT test, the shakeout, where if you're missing a pair of socks, you're kicked out of the course kind of thing. Don't have food, don't have more than 40 pieces of gum, whatever. It's like very strict rules. And then you of course go do like the big obstacle courses and all the things that they try to make sure they weed out the physically unfit people first. But then you go on patrols, which is nothing more than doing ambushes or raids in the woods. And you do that in a squad section. As you move up in the different phases, you increase your element sizes. So you do platoon operations. I can't remember if we did company ops in Florida or not, but it's just about working as a team, doing the basics and getting things right, whether you're tired, whether you're hungry, no matter what it is. You just ingrain like, I have to do this right so that we succeed. Because in real life, when you go do that against a real enemy that's shooting back with you with bullets, you may be tired, you may be hungry, but you can fall back on that training. But the cool thing is, while you're all there, you're almost all equals. I mean, people know who the officers are, and when it's time to do like mission planning and for them to brief their op order that they're going to be graded on by the cadre member who's standing over their shoulder, they're like, hey, Lieutenant Schultz, come here, help me write this. Like, how do I need to order this? How do I need to say this? Help me, craft this thing. Like he knows, the NCO knows how to do the ambush, but he may want help with the admin side of things.
Sure.
And then same for, the officer, they're like, hey, give me an NCO that knows how to, divvy up this stuff logistically or make sure everyone's got the right equipment. So you play to your strengths, but you're all supporting each other no matter what, because they'll break it up into different phases. Hey, you're in charge of planning. You're in charge of the patrol up to the objective, and then you're in charge of actions on the objective. But you don't know when you're going to be picked. So 1 second you're just a nug carrying the 240 Bravo machine gun through the woods, and then they put you in a patrol base when you're at the objective, and you're getting ready to go do the ambush, and they say, okay, new leadership, and like, oh my gosh, what's going on? They're like, all right, Lieutenant Lee, you're the squad leader, and you're like,
just got promoted. I was
just hoping I was going to carry this machine gun. Like, I don't want to do that. I am so tired. But everybody is there knowing that, hey, that could have been me, and tomorrow it will be me. So I'm going to support Zach in this endeavor right now. Like you're all just one team, and you do peer evals at the end of each phase. So the people
get voted off the island.
The people that aren't doing that, they get voted off hard. Yeah. We actually had a guy who was one of those special forces guys who made it through the Q course, wasn't Ranger Tab, so they sent him to Ranger School right away. And he was really nice, but he was kind of a dirtbag, and so we peered him out, and he recycled, and we all left him, and he was. I never saw him again. I know he was very angry because he knew what happened, but I think it was kind of a wake-up call for him. Like, hey, like, just because I'm cool and I already passed selection, like, right now I'm laying in the dirt with these guys in Georgia, so I need to do my job down here. And that was really what Ranger School taught me.
Any crazy stories as far as a guy breaking their neck, having to do 9,000 push-ups, anything? I mean, because I know maybe a better way to say it is all the different special operations schools are difficult in different ways. Like I just mentioned, Bud's is hard with the length, the cold, the sleep, but you get food. Whereas other ones, you might get less of that, but you get less food, or they're all different things. Anything that you thought was especially grueling?
So, like I said, we started in July, I think, and we got there, and this one dude fell out of, we had to do a 5-mile run as part of our PT test. He fell out of the 5-mile run with like 107 degree core body temperature. I mean, like melting your brain style, right? And so the cadre, I don't know who did this, and I've not seen it since then. And it was scarring at the time, but they had these big water troughs, right? And they would fill them up with icy water, and they would make us come over, and they would make, like, in between events, they would make us dip our elbows in it. Like that was supposed to like cool you down somehow. So they would like, all these people just around this nasty, sweaty water trough, just dipping it in, and the cadre would make fun of us. Like, all right, Rangers, come here, dip your little elbows in the water. Come on, guys, you got to cool down so we don't hurt you. And it was difficult to live down at first. We were glad to be out of there and going to the mountains where it was colder. Yeah. And like one of the first things when we got off the bus, they're like, hey, there's no water troughs here. Okay, you guys got to be tough. You can't, we're not giving you little water breaks for you to sit in. But one of the funniest things that happened to us there is in between each phase, you're given like a 12-hour pass, which is just wild. You take these guys who've been out in the woods for like 3 straight weeks, and they're like, all right, 12 hours.
To yourself. Yeah, you just
go do
shower.
Whatever. You can do whatever you want to. And one of my, it's actually funny. One of the guys that I went to airborne school with when I was a cadet, back when I was a sophomore, met this guy at airborne school, Will Rollins, and that was in 2007. Didn't see the guy again after that. And then I show up to Ranger School, and he is in my squad. I was like, oh my gosh, I know you, Will Rollins. And then we have run into each other about every 3 or 4 years randomly in our military careers. But Will had his truck there because he was in infantry school. So when it was time for our 12-hour pass, he goes, Zach, come here. I got my truck. We'll go to my house. We'll go get some hamburgers because we were starving. So we'll do some laundry. I was like, oh, dude, this is great. Like, you know, all these other guys they'll just sit in the barracks. So we went and did that. And we, for some reason, I don't know why, like the traffic was really bad getting back on post or something. We barely made it back. Our laundry was still like wet that we had tried to do because we didn't have time to finish drying it. And he was so nervous because if you miss being back, you recycle, you start over.
Yuck.
So like you're 5 minutes late, you just lost 3 weeks of your life. And so we got out of the car, and when we finally got like out of the car and we ran up there with our bags, he just like threw up on the ground. He was so sick that he was about to make me recycle and stay there again. So I appreciate his passion about it. But that was,
I love it,
my Ranger School experience.
I love it.
It was a lot of fun.
Okay, tell us a little bit, because that's different obviously than SF selection.
Yes.
Any cool stories for us, and tell us the difference between selection and the Q course.
Okay, yes. So good question. So selection is the process where they weed people out of who's going to the Q course, and then there's further weeding out at the Q course. But so
it's kind of like 2 phases.
Yeah. So really it's 3, because you have your application. So you submit your initial application. It's like a kind of a written essay or recent evals and things like that. So they can even, I think you have to do a language proficiency exam too.
What did you take, by the way? What language?
Indonesian.
Well, okay. I'm about to say some things to you in Indonesian. You just didn't know I spoke this. I don't speak it at all.
Okay.
I want to hear about that. I want to hear about that in a second. I know a little French. I don't know if that helps.
Test my vocabulary.
All right. Sorry, go ahead.
So they make you just kind of do this initial whack and see like, okay, do we even want this guy to come to selection or not? So then after you pass that, you go to selection, which is 3 weeks long. It's at least when I went through, is a series of physical events. They make you, one of my favorite was they make you do these unknown distance runs and ruck marches. So a ruck march is just putting a heavy pack on your back and moving quickly. But it's unknown distance. So you
can't really pace yourself.
No. And you start out in a large group of people, and they say, okay, you're going to start running down this road. Whenever you see signs, you follow the arrow. And when you come up to the cadre member, you're done. Just get on the truck and we'll bring you back here. So you don't know, like, am I about to run half a mile? Is this going to be 8 miles? Like, I just don't know. But you don't want to be slower than the rest of the people with you. So it's this huge mind game of like, okay, I'm going to beat you all. But if you all think this is a short run, then we are all going to be winded at a mile into this, and we may not make it to the end of it. So, but I thought it was a blast. I wasn't married. I was just off a deployment to Iraq, and I was in a good place to be able to go and do selection, right? Like mentally and physically, it was a lot of fun. After you do that, you go into a series of psych evals and testing, and then you go into what's called team week, which is where they put you with another group of guys at selection, and they give you just a random smattering of these heavy objects, and you have to figure out how to make an apparatus to move them. So they may give you like 3 20-foot poles, 2 50-gallon drums that are full of water, 2 tires, and like some rope. And they're like,
figure it out.
Right. Like, hey, you have to move 2 miles. And then there's going to be another thing you have to do. And the sun's going to set in 5 hours. So let's see like how fast, because then you're going to have to do it the next day and the next day. So it's like it's a building thing. If you and that team don't work well together to figure out like, how can we rig something up to move this efficiently, then you're going to get back late. You're going to be burnt out. You start the next day burnt out. Then you're not an asset to that team. And then so it's just like it spirals. It goes down on you as you continue. But at the end of that, they tell you on the spot who is going to go to the Q course and who's not going to the Q course. And they have different selection criteria. I think it's a pretty close hold secret for like the cadre and everything. I mean, I'm sure it has to do with the numbers of people that they need in the force, like what's coming up over the next 2 to 3 years. What were the attrition rates like last year?
So there's a subjective component that's pretty big.
Yes, there is. It's huge. I mean, because you're graded on everything that you're doing. I mean, the run or the ruck, it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, this guy ran 3.5 miles in this much time, and he fell in, this ranking. But when you're doing that team week stuff, you've got cadre right there over your shoulder. Like, what is this guy doing? How is he playing with the team? And again, there's no ranks there. So the people know who is an officer and who's not. And but the cadre, they also know too. So they know like, okay, if
this guy's not stepping up, or this enlisted guy's leading.
Exactly. He should be doing what we need him to be doing when he leaves here. And these guys have a vested interest in doing this, because the guys that are running the school, they're the ones that are going back to these teams. And so they don't want dirtbags to go through, and then they see them in their team room 3 years later and be like, oh crap, I should have screened you harder. But that's the selection process. So then you find out if you're going, then you go to the Q course. The Q course is it's a 14-month long block if you don't recycle anything. So you do intro to unconventional warfare. You go and do your small unit training, which is kind of like a mini version of Ranger School. And then you get into your MOS specific training, which is, if you're going to be that engineer, that commo guy, the officer, et cetera. You do your language school, which is 6 months of just in a classroom every day with a language instructor. And you get your language assigned to you based on the group you're going to and your language
That's why Indonesian
aptitude thing. Yes, exactly. So first group assigned with the Pacific region. So Indonesian, Mandarin Chinese, Korean, Tagalog, Korean. Those are the languges.
How do I get assigned to the UK? Like, I think that would be an easy.
Great question. I don't think that's. I don't think there's a choice in that. But they do a really good job, and they've gotten better at assigning people languages. But then after that, you go do this culmination, right? So Robin Sage is the name of it. It's probably one of the most realistic, like army or military role playing deals, training exercises you can do. So they take a group of 12 guys, your team. You've all been through all your training. This is like the last thing you do before you go to your actual team. And they give you this guerrilla warfare mission. You're supposed to go and assess and train, advise, assist them, and help them to defeat this whatever sort of dictatorship or they've got going on in their country. And it is so realistic. It's spread out all across North Carolina, and the guys that run these lanes, I mean, they get people in the towns involved. So you're out running like real scenarios
with actors. Basically.
Yeah. In fact, they make you wear because you're in plain clothes most of the time too. Because if you were in a foreign country in the jungles, you're not going to wear your military uniform. So you're in plain clothes for this, and they make you wear an armband because they've had altercations with law enforcement.
Oh God.
Where these dudes are told, hey, everything is live. Nothing is not in play. And so they're out there and they're like, there's a police officer. And so they're treating, the student is treating them like they're part of the scenario. And this dude is like, these guys are out of their mind. I have no idea what they're talking about. And so, and then the cadre have to like step in and like, hey, wait, like, this is Special Forces Q course. Like, this is a real law enforcement officer, like y'all both. So they have to take all those extra precautions. But so when I was doing Robin Sage, at the beginning of the Q course, you go and support Robin Sage as a new student. So that's your intro to unconventional warfare. You're just a part of the guerrilla force, and the guys that are about to graduate the Q course that you're about to start are out there doing the exercise, and you're one of the role players for them. So when I went out to go and do this, I showed up. We did this really long infill with these 100+ pound rucksacks. We like rode on a bus, walked, did pack mules for a little while. I mean, this was like intense. This was real, right?
In case you go to war in Chile.
Oh,
something like that. Yeah.
It was fun. But I show up there, and there's the guy that comes out to meet us from the guerrilla base, and I was, the captain of the team in the scenario. I recognized him, and I won't say his name because he may still be there. He was an old Iraqi interpreter who was working with the guys, to help run this exercise for the Q course. And I recognized the guy, and so like after we kind of like did the initial meet and greet, and he's like, "Yeah, we'll bring you into the G base." He like pulled me aside, and he's like, "Are you Zach?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Is this the lane I was on?" He goes, "Yeah." And he's like, "This is not supposed to happen." And I was like, "Don't tell anybody."
Yes.
Because I thought, I was like, I know the scenario. I know what's going to go on out here, right? Like I know like all the different like, pitfalls that we're going to hit, or, what's going to happen. And the guy who was running our lane, I mean, he poured his heart and soul into doing this, and did a phenomenal job with the training exercise. And we were told at the beginning, everything is in play. Do not come out of character for any reason. So I said, okay, I will not come out of character. I will just pretend like I don't know what's going on here. And so we're out there doing it. Well, they figured out that, and if we walk into this G base, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was here a year ago. Like, this is awesome. I'm gonna be able to help my team out. And they figured out that I knew what was going on, because I guess they lined the rosters up somehow, and like, this dude's been here before. So they changed the scenario, and they split me and some of the guys off and like sent us in town to work with a different part of the guerrilla force. And so like our team that was back there was just getting hammered with all this stuff because they were short staffed, because they sent me and some guys away. They put us in like an administrative flag state, me and the other officer. They pulled us aside. They're like, hey, we think you guys are out here gaming the system. Like, so you're out. You like brought the colonel down to counsel us. Like, you guys better shape up, or you're going to be disqualified from the course. And we're like, we walked away. We're like, dude, we were doing our very best. And then at the end, he told us, like, he goes, yeah, I just knew you guys were getting cocky, so I wanted to like bring you down a peg. And I knew you'd been here before, so I didn't want you to like think you knew everything that was going on. I was like, okay, well, gosh. There are less stressful ways you could have done that to us, but that's fine. Yeah, because you got like a year and a half of your life riding on how do I do at this one exercise to get out of here.
Gosh. Sometimes role play doesn't go well.
No.
Okay, let me ask you this, because that stuff is fascinating. I want to talk a little bit about Tier 1 units, because you'd mentioned Tier 2, Tier 1. Specifically, I'm thinking of Delta in the Army, and then in the Navy being SEAL Team 6, DevGru. Talk to me about those Tier 1 units, how they're different than the other units. I mean, they were even, they're shrouded in a lot of secrecy, weren't allowed to talk about them for a while. Charlie Beckwith, all these guys, chat with me.
So those units, much like the other soft units, they have their own selection and their training that you have to go through, right? So you don't just walk into those units off the street. And most of the guys that are in those units are vetted from other soft units. So like the Ranger Regiment's kind of like a feeder organization for the Army side, and then the SEAL teams are obviously a feeder for the Navy side to bring people in. But I mean, so those guys are going to be, like you said, shrouded in secrecy. There's a lot you can and can't say about them, but they're going to be the absolute very best at performing direct action missions on behalf of the U.S. So like whether that's raids for equipment or high value targets, or hostage rescue, things like that. The amount of training those guys receive to go do that, and then the assets that are brought to bear on their behalf to go do those missions is incredible. But they're the best in the world at doing those things. We don't get to. You don't really work hand in hand with them a lot of times because they're a high commodity,
Sure.
Or they're a valuable asset for the military. So
Sure.
they're not just like down there in the trenches doing guerrilla warfare with you in a country, right? They're in, they're out, they're doing what needs to be done, and then they're gone. But I can't really say too much more about it.
Yeah, and
but,
don't do anything to get you in trouble.
No, and they are the very best trained, the very best equipped, and knowing some of them, just also some of the most humble people that you'll ever meet. You have no idea that they've done what they've done. It's incredible.
I love it.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay. So talk to me about this. What is the future of SOF units? Where are they headed? Are women now allowed in any of these roles? I mean, you can share as much or as little as you want. This is a free speech platform.
Okay.
So whatever you want to share, you're not going to offend me or not offend me. I will just be neutral.
Okay.
But talk to us about, I do have a question about women allowed in SOF roles and just your thoughts on that, but also just the future of SOF units. How are things changing? Is it a kinder, gentler army? Is it just more technology? What are your thoughts?
So SOF is being used in a lot of different ways with the advancement of technology, right? Like before we had, the cyber capabilities that we have, or the technological advances that we now have on the battlefield, in like the use of drones and things like that, right? That technology that's being used is incredible. But you had to rely on SOF units to do a lot of these, right? To have like certain access and certain placement to be able to get in, to be able to work with people. But now having some of the other things that we have, I think SOF is still going to be used a lot, but it's not going to be the door kickers as much. I mean, there's still absolutely a place for them. They're still needed, but it's going to be a lot of the other side, right? Like the intel side that supports the SOF units, or the psychological operations side, the people that help control like that information operation, the messaging that goes out in a country. Like I mentioned earlier, the Army has a civil affairs side, focusing very heavily on that political realm and how the civil and the political realm are affected by that warfare and side of the house. And so those are the forces that are going to be used a lot more. SOF is going to be used, but I think it's going to be used more as I don't want to say this, like it kind of in that deterrence, that disruptor kind of role. So one of the most common missions, I use like the Green Berets because that's where I'm from. The most common missions we have is a JSET, which is a Joint Combined Exchange Training mission. So that's where you and your 12-man team go into country X. So like my team did some specifically in Japan and Korea, where you go in and you work with that.
North Korea. I'm just kidding.
South Korea.
I'm just kidding. Totally joking. And by the way, none of this is confidential, so everything.
So you go into these other countries, you work with the other special operations units or even the conventional units there. And you're embedded with them for, it could be 4 weeks, it could be 6 months. You're exchanging SOPs, you're exchanging tactics of how you do things versus how they do things. You work side by side, building relationships, building bonds with these people. And you're not the only team that's doing that, right? There's a lot of special operations teams. Even the Navy does their own flavor of JSETs with their SEAL teams. So you're going in and you're creating these relationships with these other militaries as a deterrence. If you have rogue state or non-state actors that know that, hey, not only is the U.S. able to, affect us technologically, financially, politically, but they're also best friends with the military of the country that I'm thinking about messing with, that's going to make you think twice about what you're going to do. It also helps the U.S. because we now know people in those countries. We know how they operate, so that if something were to happen, you can go in and you're that much closer to being able to start running. You don't want to hit the ground crawling, walking in a high intensity or a kinetic situation. You want to go in and you want to work with, hey, I have been here before. We know this terrain. We did a training event here. I know the captain of this special operations detachment that they have. Like, you can go in and you can make those connections a lot faster if you've been there before in a peacetime.
Totally.
Rather than going in under the gun.
Yeah, you're doing all the planning beforehand. Prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance. There it is.
Nailed it.
Okay, it's a tongue twister for me. I've got 2 more questions for you. All this is super helpful, dude. I appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. You probably imagined at some point, but you said in your story maybe that you didn't, that this was something that came later when you were at A&M. Kind of, I think every young boy has this, I'm going to join the military, here's what it's going to be like. Give me myth versus reality, getting into special operations and also being in the military. Was it what you thought it was going to be? Better, worse, different? That answer could be like 10 hours, but can you summarize for some big kind of myth versus reality of special operations?
Yeah. I didn't have the dream of growing up in it, but it was just kind of the next building block for me. Like I did Boy Scouts when I was growing up, and that gives you structure, and you work hard, you obtain the rank of Eagle Scout, then go to the Corps. It's like, okay, how do I succeed here? Like what are the metrics? What do I need to hit? And then it's like, okay, go into the Army. What's that next metric? What's that next gate that you have to go through? So it was a very natural progression. But then when you get there, like you said, the movies make everything look super cool and it's just action all the time. But that's not the case. Most of what you're doing is boring to some degree, but it's the boring stuff that allows you to be successful when things are exciting. It's the planning and the preparation that you do before you go to the range to shoot, like doing dry fire drills at your house, right? Like if you do those, you're more effective when you're on the range. Your range time is utilized better. It's the same way there, but it's dry fire with everything that you're doing. So doing your commo classes, doing your medical training, doing your dry fire with your actual weapon, right? It's the training, it's the preparation that makes you successful when it's time to go execute. A lot of what I did as an officer, and we didn't even get into how much cooler it is to be an NCO than an officer, but as an officer, you're in charge, but you're not running things, if that makes sense, or you can switch that if you want to. But it's the team that's running things, specifically your team sergeant. Not to say that you're not value added, but your job is to be able to represent your team, to sell your team, to sell your preparedness, to sell your capabilities so that you get that next mission. Because in a special forces company, there's, you've got your company command element, and then you've got 6 teams. And there may only be 3 JSETs that year. And if you don't go to a JSET, then you're doing a lot of like range time, and you may go support these guys over here. So you're like, no, we want to go to the Philippines. Like we're going on that mission. So you prove that your team can do it better than another team. You prove that you're postured better. That's what the officer's job is. And so there's like this balance between like, I want to be down in the trenches with the guys, but I also have to be on the radio with hire. I have to be communicating and doing what we're supposed to do. But then that's rewarding because you see your team executing and being successful, and you know that you were a critical component of that. But yeah, that's the biggest culture shock to me. Sure. It's just, it's just
how much time you're not doing missions, where you think, hey, one week, I have one mission a week or something like that.
But it's also amazing how busy you can be even despite that. It's like we went to the range once this month, but every day was full of stuff. Like, how did that even happen? But I mean, there's just things that have to get done. It's like any other organization or company, you have to take care of the administrative side of things, whether it's private sector or government sector. There's an administrative side, there's a planning side, there's rules, regulations you have to follow. You have to get smart on that so that you can go and you can run through something like that.
Awesome. Super, super helpful. Let me ask our last question. Last question of the day. Any advice you would give to someone considering life in SOF? So some maybe young guys listening to this and he's thinking about going into some branch of the military and specifically doing special operations. Thoughts, any advice you'd give?
Yeah, a couple things. They need to consider what they want to do. So like I said, there's different elements that each SOF entity has, right? So are you good at swimming? Do you like the water? Do you want to do direct action and water stuff? Cool, you should go to the Navy SEALs. Do you want to just fly in helicopters and shoot bad guys in the face? Go to the Ranger Regiment. Do you have a personal element? Do you like working and helping and teaching people? Go to the Green Berets. That's if you get to choose everything, right? If you're in an Army unit though, and you're trying to choose between, do I go Rangers? Do I go Special Forces? Do I go Civil Affairs? Go talk to somebody who's done it. People that have done it are more than happy to tell you their experiences and give you some insight. But I have to say, I mean, it takes, I mean, we kind of talked about it at the beginning. It takes a toll on you. And if you have a family, it takes a toll on your family.
It's a single man's game, dude. I feel like it's a single man's game.
It is. And I did it all as a single man up until, my wife and I were actually engaged while I was in the Q Corps. So like up until that point, I had done it all as a single man's game. And I approached everything with an attitude of, I hate losing more than I want to win. And there's a difference, right? Like you have to be so immovable and tenacious about achieving your goal, that just nothing's going to stop you because the training's going to be hard. You're going to get hurt. There'll be setbacks. There will be disappointments. You have to be able to overcome those and keep going at it if given the chance. I mean, they may tell you like, hey, you're medically not able to. It's like, okay, well, what are you going to do at that point? Find the next thing that you can do, right? But you got to get the buy-in from your family because it's going to be hard on you. It's going to be hard on them. And if they're not with you, then you're putting them through a lot of unnecessary stress.
Sure.
So talk to people that have done it, get the buy-in from your family, and then just you have to be as prepared as you possibly can going into this. The more mentally prepared you are, the better. And I always told like the job that I have now in the reserves, I teach cadets in ROTC, and they always ask me like, how do I, like guys that are commissioning that are going to go to Ranger School, like what do I need to do to go to Ranger School? What do I need to do to go to the Q course? Be in good shape. Like if you're, people that are in good shape are harder to kill, number one. But then there's so much less stress. If you're not worried about passing your 5-mile run, you're just going to go out. You just know you're going to smoke it on 2 hours of sleep. Big deal. Doesn't matter. That's one less thing you have to worry about. Now you can just worry about that next target ahead of you. You never have to, like I said, the unknown distance runs and rucks, those were fun for me because I knew it wasn't going to be an issue. And I would just stay right there with the front of the pack the entire way. And then when we saw the finish line, like may the best man get there first kind of thing, you know, that you have to approach it with that mentality of just being as prepared as possible physically and mentally, and then make sure that your family's there with you. And then lastly, you got to look at what you want to do and ask yourself if that's the future that you want to, because just getting there can take you 2 years, just getting into the soft unit. But then once you're there, I mean, a lot of those guys make it a career. And if not a career, I mean, it's a 5 or 6 year endeavor of, you know, your time and your energy there, and you're gone a lot. Soft units, like I said, they're low density and in high demand for missions all around the world. And so with you needing to be gone either in training or on actual deployments a lot, you got to be prepared to be away from your family or away from whatever else in life that you want to do and be able to kind of like make that your mission, your focus. So that would be my advice to people that want to pursue a soft career. Know what you're getting into and then go after it just wholeheartedly.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, dude, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for joining us on Ideological. We'll see you next time.
All right.